In just 6 weeks, voters will head to the voting booths. Open seats all over the state. How is campaigning shaping up?
The power of the media is significantly diminished from where it was even 10 years ago in terms of having an impact on these races. What really has an impact on the races, I think, is the money that's spent.
How will the influx of undocumented children from Central America play a role in the upcoming election?
When you actually hear or know people who work on the border and they see the reality, it creates a certain kind of resonance.
This is Arizona Week. Early voting begins in 2 short weeks, and the state's primary races are already heating up, and the campaign ads are out. Your Vote 2014, a midterm election to watch. From the national stage to the local level, here's what you need to know. The primary is August 26th. Early voting begins July 31st. In Arizona, arguably the biggest race for governor, a crowded field, 6 Republicans in the primary. Ken Bennett, Arizona's Secretary of State, a former state legislator.
We need to spend more in the classroom. We need to pay our teachers better. We need to grow the economic pie so that a bigger share of that pie, without a tax increase, can go to education.
Doug Ducey, Arizona's treasurer, the former CEO of Cold Stone Creamery, an Arizona-based, now international ice cream chain.
As state treasurer, I put Arizona taxpayers first, and that's exactly what I'll do as governor, because state government should always serve the citizens.
Scott Smith, the former mayor of Mesa, a Republican who supported Governor Brewer in her decision to expand Medicaid. He was the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
As mayor, we enforced the law, apprehended illegal immigrants, and made Mesa one of the safest big cities in America. As your governor, I'll strengthen our borders, and I'll protect Arizona.
Christine Jones, a former GoDaddy executive, an attorney, and the only female on the gubernatorial ticket.
If you do come to Arizona illegally, you're breaking the law, and you'll have to pay for that. You'll not be given priority, you'll not be given amnesty. We have a path to citizenship. If you want to follow that, welcome.
Frank Riggs, a former California congressman, an Army veteran, former police officer, a businessman, and entrepreneur.
I'm running for governor of Arizona to offer my lifetime of leadership experience to my fellow Arizonans. And I'm running for governor of Arizona to stop the Obamanization of Arizona.
And Andrew Thomas, the former Maricopa County attorney, he ran unsuccessfully for Arizona's attorney general. The state bar stripped him of his license.
Conservatives are backing Andrew Thomas for governor because he's the only candidate who has stopped illegal immigration, stood up to the gay lobby, and opposed liberal judges.
Whoever wins the primary will face off against Fred Duval, the only Democrat on the ticket. There are 5 other statewide races and 90 legislative races. We'll get to them in a journalist discussion. On the federal level, Arizona's congressional districts 1, 2, and 9 will be in the national spotlight. In Congressional District 1, incumbent Democrat Ann Kirkpatrick is being challenged by current state legislators and Republicans Adam Quasman and Andy Tobin, and fellow Republican Gary Keene. In CD2, Democratic incumbent Ron Barber faces whoever wins the Republican primary between Shelley Keiss, Chuck Wooten, and Martha McSally. McSally, an Air Force veteran, lost to Barber by a narrow margin 2 years ago. And in CD9, Republicans Wendy Rogers and Andrew Walter are in the primary. Whoever wins will challenge Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat incumbent. The less competitive races are Congressional Districts 3, 4, 5, and 6, and CD7 is one to watch. Whoever wins replaces longtime Democratic Congressman Ed Pastor, who's retiring at the end of his term. Immigration, a talking point for candidates, part of nearly everyone's platform. And in recent weeks, the unprecedented cases of tens of thousands of undocumented children from Central America is taking on a life of its own in campaigning. Here's my colleague, Christopher Conover, with Dr. Kate Kensky from the Communications Department at the University of Arizona.
Dr. Kate Kensky, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you for having me.
In recent weeks, the immigration reform question has really kind of popped back into the national news with this issue of unaccompanied minors coming across the border. We're hearing some different messaging. The Republicans are very much doing the messaging of we need to secure the border. The border is not secure, and the Democrats, it seems, are more messaging that we need to work with Central America and fix the problems that are causing these kids to come up. How do these messages play in this midterm election year and going forward into 2016?
Well, I think they've made it so that comprehensive immigration reform, is a very problematic entity because people get cross-pressured on different points that they tend to focus on. Now, realistically, if we're ever going to have immigration reform, compromises are going to have to be made. But if people are so focused on only one aspect of the problem, they're going to negate seeing how other people see the problem as well. And so that's created a lot of conflict because people are coming in from completely different points of view and looking at immigration as a whole.
We're hearing, it seems, two different messages. The national message to people in Rhode Island and Oregon and every place else, and then the local message. We have a gubernatorial election this year, as well as congressional elections like the rest of the country does. Do those messages really differ, local versus national, or are they just offshoots of each other?
Well, they're certainly related, but I think the bottom line is when you're in a border state, you see the reality in a way that people north of the border states simply are not going to see it, or the states that don't, aren't from the south. And so that makes a difference. I think that when you actually hear or know people who work on the border and they see the reality, it creates a certain kind of resonance. And so the way in which people interpret messages here resonates much more strongly than when you're a bit more distant and you hear about the financial consequences, maybe a little bit of the human consequences, but again, you don't have that same kind of resonance to see the desperation of needing to solve some of the problems we have.
The immigration reform bills in the last week's month or so really seem to have died at this point. How does that play in this election year?
In some ways, we can say it's not surprising. Having sweeping legislation passed on almost any issue is much harder in your even-numbered years because suddenly it raises it in a different way. The people running for their seats don't know exactly how things are going to play, and we know with the American electorate how something is framed can change things within a couple months' time. And so generally speaking, people don't like going into elections with unknowns, and therefore big sweeping reforms are much harder to pass. Now, with the immigration reform, of course, we know that the Senate was willing to pass it by a significant, last year. And that seemed to be an opportune time in a non-election year.
We have Democrats urging the president to act through executive order. Politically, is that something he can do, especially with the U.S. Supreme Court decision on recess appointments, even though it's a different issue, but it is hanging out there, or is this something politically he really can't touch?
Well, he's not going to be running again in 2016, so he has that benefit. But I think that a president who's looking at the big picture has to be cautious because the bottom line is if he acts in this way on this issue, what is to stop the next president, who may or may not be a Democrat, from doing the same? And so I think that anyone who's seen the big picture is going to be a bit hesitant to act that way.
Immigration reform, obviously a big issue here, immigration in general. But is the question politically in our gubernatorial year a question that can really sway voters? We have Christine Jones, a Republican running for governor. She's out with her plan. We've seen some other plans from gubernatorial candidates in recent days and weeks. Is this an issue that really sways a voter, or is this one of those core issues in Arizona? People know how they feel, and whatever the candidates say doesn't matter.
I would say that it's very rare on most issues that we actually change people's opinion. But depending on how things are framed, those particular issues can motivate people to come out to vote or cross-pressure them to stay home. And so you're absolutely right to the extent that is it likely that most Arizonans don't know where they stand at all on any aspect of immigration? Fairly unlikely. But depending on how the candidates handle it, that could either mobilize their base or cross-pressure the other side to stay away from the polls.
And especially in a crowded Republican primary like we have here, it could, I guess, bring a person from one candidate to another because there are so many fine differences.
That's right. And finding that hook. I mean, crowded primaries are difficult because you're winning by plurality, and it's a lot harder to judge. We have a lot of polling on Democrat versus Republican. Understanding the nuances is much more difficult.
All right, Dr. Kate Kensky, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And joining me to discuss the upcoming election are Robert Robb from the Arizona Republic. He's joining us from our affiliate in Phoenix, KAET. Also Jim Ninsel from the Tucson Weekly, and my colleague here at Arizona Public Media, Christopher Conover. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Christopher, let's start with you. The ads are really charged at this point. We're seeing a lot of immigration in these campaign ads. What do you attribute that to?
That's the big topic this year. It's always a topic in Arizona. As long as I've been here, elections equal immigration discussions. But with all the national attention in recent weeks and months, it's given everybody an even bigger chance to bring the topic up. So it's obviously not going to go away between now and November here in Arizona, at the very least.
And Robert, on the scale of what we're seeing up at the Arizona Republic, it's a subject that is not going away anytime soon. It's been heightened, as a matter of fact, by the situation with the children from Central America.
Yes, I actually think that immigration had receded significantly as a state issue. But with the influx of unaccompanied adolescents from Central America and the sense of helplessness that people had about our ability to stem it or deal with it, it has certainly made it far more salient. I'm not sure as the election progresses for state offices that won't recede again just because there's so little that the state can do about it, and that's been demonstrated over the course of the last several years.
And I think it's important to realize that it's also Republican primaries where we're seeing all this going on, and I think Republican primary voters are much more interested in this topic than the general public. I'm not saying the general public's not interested in it, but it's a particularly strong point among Republican primary voters, and that's why you're seeing a lot of it going on in the Republican primary ads. There's a poll released this week by High Ground up in Phoenix, and it showed that it's huge issue among the Republican primary voters, so much so that it's one of the few things that they said they're willing to raise their taxes to actually deal with.
And just with the primary just a couple of weeks away, we saw an ad come out from candidate Andrew Thomas this morning. Pretty clear and direct on his position when it comes to Mexico. In the ad you see, if you will, just a red stripe across the Mexican flag, which I think is pretty emotional, maybe takes us to a new level. Would you agree, Jim?
Well, I think Andrew Thomas wouldn't be a candidate able to run ads if it weren't for clean elections. I think he's a fringe candidate, and he is definitely someone who is hammering the illegal immigration issue, saying that he's the only one who's actually stopped illegal immigration during his time as the Maricopa County attorney. Of course, he has been disbarred as an attorney because of his abuses of power as Maricopa County attorney, and I doubt he'll get more than 5 or 6% of the vote when everything's counted in that primary.
Okay, and Christopher, we're seeing a lot of money, not necessarily early on, but certainly a lot of money that's funding some of these ads.
There's plenty of money, especially in the upper end of the gubernatorial race. For example, Doug Ducey, who in a lot of the Republican polls is the leader at this point. He brought in $2 million so far. He's also spent $1 million. Christine Jones, who has been coming up in those polls and is starting to nip at Ducey's tail a little bit, she brought in $2.3 million. She spent $1.9, but it should be noted of that money that she brought in, she loaned herself $1.6 million. but she's really starting to come up in some of the polls. What's interesting, that same high ground poll that Jim was talking about, the biggest vote getter, if you will, is undecided at this point. We have a 6-way race in the Republican primary, and undecided is still 2 weeks out from when early ballots go out, the biggest vote getter at this point.
Robert, would you agree with that?
Not entirely. The spending for the governor's race is big, certainly compared to any other race that's going on. But probably Ducey and Jones are spending at a rate that will produce primary election spending in the $3.5 to $5 million range. Our last U.S. senatorial campaigns have run in the $10 to $15 million range. I don't think we're getting saturated television advertising. And the negative attack ads have relatively low buys, except for the most recent pro-Jones, anti-Ducey ad buy, which is running close to $1 million. So it's enough to get your message across, but I don't know that it's saturation. And I don't know that Ducey has the ability to increase his ad rate all that much. Jones might have a greater capacity because, as mentioned, of her willingness to tap her own fortune.
Jim, do you think maybe it's just too early at this point?
Well, I think all of these candidates had relatively low name ID going into this race. I don't think people know who their treasurer is. Christine Jones, total newcomer to politics. Ken Bennett, Secretary of State, has been in the legislature for a long time, but people don't tend to know who their lawmakers are. So I think that all of them need to work to get their name ID up. But on the other hand, Democrat Fred Duvall isn't really that well known either, although he's doing a very good job of raising money. He doesn't have the benefit of a Democratic primary to kind of raise his profile, so he's going to need that money, but he will have plenty of it once the general begins in earnest after the primary.
I saw an ad with Doug Ducey where he touts his reputation, his position with Cold Stone Creamery. How much of a factor do you think that may play in with some voters who wonder, well, I do have ice cream and I enjoy it, so I'm going to vote for this guy? Christopher?
I think it probably plays in about as much as Christine Jones' leadership at GoDaddy.com, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, internet provider, not to you and I in our homes, but hosting websites and things like that. It shows they both have worked in the private sector. Each will throw rocks at the other about their leadership abilities of those companies. So in the end, I think that kind of mutes each other.
Okay, let's move on. This week we saw a lot of talk surrounding Attorney General Tom Horne, an investigation coming up here. What does this mean for his future and the rest of the campaigns? Robert, do you want to chime in on this?
Well, you've probably not had a incumbent state office holder facing the raft of troubles that Tom Horne has in a very long time. And I don't trust most of the public polls just because getting to who will really vote in Republican primary is a pretty arduous task, and most public polls aren't willing to invest what it would take to actually get down to that voting population. However, all the public polls do seem to indicate the same thing, which is that Horne's challenger, Mark Brnovich, seems to have turned the tide, even though he has virtually no money. So it would be a referendum on Horne. Horne has some arguments to make to Republican primary voters. He's got a little bit of money to make those arguments. So no one is writing him off yet, but I think certainly everybody has their political obituaries in the process of being written.
Jim Ninsel may want to say what he thinks about that.
I think, yeah, as Bob said, you rarely see a politician facing the kinds of bad press that Tom Horne has faced in this campaign. And I think Mark Brnovich, his Republican opponent, isn't well known, but his best advantage is that he's not Tom Horne. And it is indeed a referendum on where Tom Horne is. It's kind of fascinating to see the governor coming out and endorsing Brnovich by saying that he would fight the Obama administration when Tom Horne has, in fact, put most of his energy into trying to fight the Obama administration. The right to life Political Action Committee endorsed Mark Brnovich, saying that he was a real pro-life candidate. Tom Horne has taken every step he can to take cases to affect abortion laws all the way to the Supreme Court, even though they were sure losers. So even people who would be natural allies of Tom Horne are pretty well abandoning him at this point. We
really see the Republican establishment kind of pushing off from Tom Horne. Jeff Flake, John McCain have both pushed off from him. As Jim mentioned, the governor came out and endorsed Brnovich, even though he's a relative unknown, and the governor has worked with Tom Horne on a number of issues over the years. This race, if Brnovich wins, as Rob said, may be more of a referendum on Horne, at least in the primary, because Brnovich has a lot less money than Horne does at this point. But again, this will be up to the voters, and I think Rob is right, even though the public polls, the polls that we're seeing, are predicting a Brnovich win. Sometimes it's a little hard to predict what the voters will do come Election Day.
Okay, let's move on now to Superintendent John Huppenthal, also in some trouble over the last few weeks or so. What does the future hold for him? Is this the end?
I think Huppenthal is facing a similar uphill battle to Horne. Horne, granted, has legal investigations against him. But Huppenthal definitely is facing, at the very least, some difficult PR to get out of. So his race is going to be an interesting one, and went from one I think a lot of people weren't paying attention to. As Jim said, you don't necessarily know who a lot of your elected officials are after the governor, to people now know who Huppenthal is, and he keeps popping up to the top of the news cycle, if only briefly.
Robert, why do you suppose he did not resign?
I think Huppenthal has a strong commitment, particularly to putting in the sort of data systems that will enable school administrators and teachers to be more directly involved with individual achievement needs of students. He's had a passion for education issues for a very long time. And not to try to psychoanalyze the guy too much, I think he has a lot of self-image invested in being a politician and holding public office. Additionally, if he were to resign, it would leave Republican primary voters without a supporter of Common Core. And certainly that's something that's very important to the business community. And so I think both the timing of it, his own personal interest in completing some of the tasks of the job, and what he's vested in self-image in terms of the office, all dictated to him against resigning at this point.
Jim, do you think his career is over?
Well, you know what? I think the Common Core point that Bob makes is an important one, because I don't think that John Huppenthal's Republican opponent would exist without Common Core. She's a fierce opponent of Common Core. That's another issue that's huge among Republican primary voters. They really hate the Common Core learning standards. They believe it's some sort of plot by President Obama to introduce Kenyan learning standards into American schools or something like that. And so I think Huppenthal's support of that really may give him some trouble in the Republican primary, because his opponent has managed to get her clean elections funding. Now it's less than $100,000, so it doesn't give you a lot of money to get a message out. But if he survives the primary, he's terribly damaged going into the general election. The hit pieces really write themselves with the comments that he made on all these blogs under his various pseudonyms.
Okay, and you're referring to Diane Douglas.
Diane Douglas.
Okay. All right, let's move on to Secretary of State. We have seen those ads popping up around town. What do we think there? We have some candidates: Will Cardin, Justin Pierce, Michelle Reagan, and of course Terry Goddard, who is familiar ground here, stepping into another race. What do you think, Christopher?
It's interesting. That ad, we've now seen a little bit of the proverbial dark money. The Arizona Free Enterprise Club is supporting Justin Pierce and running some ads for him. Again, that's one of those races a lot of people don't pay attention to, but we are seeing some ads. Will Cardin, to people who pay attention to politics, is not an unfamiliar name. He's run before for other offices. He's running now for a statewide office as Secretary of State. So his name is not unfamiliar to a lot of people, those who pay attention to politics. But again, this is one of those down ticket races, if you will, that a lot of people won't really notice unless we do our jobs collectively. Most people aren't aware that that's a position.
And even if we do our jobs, the power of the media is significantly diminished from where it was even 10 years ago in terms of having an impact on these races. What really has an impact on the races, I think, is the money that's spent on television commercials, on mailers, on get out the votes efforts. And if our stories are amplified by those television commercials or by those mailers, and they use quotes from our stories, then our stories have a little more juice. But for the most part, I think people are not looking to the media to help them make those decisions.
Robert, you've certainly had a lot to write about recently with respect to some of the chatter involving some of these candidates. Well, what do you think that does for your readers?
The attention that's paid for politics, even though we're only a week or so out from early voting beginning, is fairly minimal. But I did want to say the biggest mystery in the Secretary of State race to me, and indeed this entire election cycle so far, has been Will Cardin's campaign for Secretary of State. This is someone who spent millions out of his own pocket in a quest to defeat Jeff Flake to be the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate. When he announced for Secretary of State, the assumption was that he was going to free spin in this race as well and would be formidable in terms of outspending his opponents. And so far, he really hasn't cracked the wallet. It's not been the lopsided spending race that people anticipated. And that may come, but to build up to the start of early voting, it needed to have begun and been fairly intensive by now. So to me, that's the biggest mystery of this election season so far.
Okay, let's go quickly to Congressional District 2. Some new numbers came out that I think are going to get people talking. Christopher.
The new numbers are that Martha McSally has once again outraised Ron Barber, the incumbent. It's interesting, the Barber campaign folks were very quick on Twitter this week when those stories hit, saying, but Barber has more money in it, trying to spin that he's got more money in the bank. But the Barber campaign sent out an email immediately asking for more money, saying things were dire.
Okay, Jim?
I think both candidates are going to have enough money to get their message out. I think the independent campaign committees are going to be spending perhaps even more than the candidates are spending. It's going to be a very close race, and I think it ultimately will come down to who can really work to get out the vote.
Okay, and Robert, do you think that CD2 race could change the landscape of Arizona?
Certainly we have 3 congressional swing districts. My own view is what the candidates raise themselves don't matter. There'll be so much national money flooding into these districts that unfortunately these candidates largely become bystanders in their own campaigns.
Okay, Robert Robb from the Arizona Republic, Jim Ninsel from the Tucson Weekly, Christopher Cano from Arizona Public Media. Gentlemen, thank you for your analysis. And that's our program. For all of us here at Arizona Week, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you so much for joining us.